Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the Behind Closed Doors podcast. My name is Luke Vi, and I'm your host. And today we're doing it a little bit differently. We are traveling. We're on the road today, not in the studio anymore. As you can see, I'm here with a special guest today as well, Mr. Riis Christensen. Riis, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit? Where are you from, and then what's your education?
Well, thanks, Luke. Originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, I belong to the world's smallest minority group, which is Danish Cajuns. And grew up in Lafayette, and then went across the Sabine River to Texas and went to college at SMU and got a business degree, but minored in history and geology. And I did a little bit of writing for D Magazine and had an article published in 2013, which was the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And it was about the building where the sniper's perch was and how it was the most important piece of property in Dallas. It's where the founder of Dallas started his river crossing service across the Trinity River. It was the first courthouse. It was the first post office. And it later morphed into the Texas School Book Depository. And so that's what was the original catalyst for really diving deep into the whole JFK conspiracy theory.
Just to get started with JFK, it's been 61 years since the assassination, and so with all these conspiracy theories, all these mysterious deaths, even just today, the day of recording, there was a celebrity death. Liam Payne, a famous pop singer, he died today. And 61 years later, why should we still care so much about the JFK assassination?
Well, it is one of the two greatest and grandest conspiracy theory cases in all of history. It's certainly the biggest story of the 20th century and perhaps of all time. It's been credited with kind of spawning the whole conspiracy phenomenon and industry.
How did you personally get interested within JFK?
Well, I started digging in. I was in commercial real estate in Dallas and had been writing for D Magazine for years about different pieces of property and kind of the history of Dallas. Most of the people in Dallas, like maybe a lot of people in Lincoln, didn't grow up here. And so I was ignorant about Dallas's history and how it had grown. And I originally started writing that article kind of about the founding of Dallas, and then I realized how this on this piece of property there had been a wagon and plow company after John Neely Bryant had kicked the development of Dallas off, and there had been slave quarters there. And then the building had been built, and ultimately the Texas School Book Depository there. So I just thought it was fascinating that all this history was packed into this one, 2-acre parcel in downtown Dallas.
Okay, that is really cool. With the D Magazine, you did write that article. You said on the 50th anniversary in 2013,
right?
And I actually shared that to the X page. And so, how many articles have been written on it? Because you just feel like every single year, every single month, there's more information, there's a new angle, there's new information coming out on the JFK conspiracy. Just how much has been written and talked about the conspiracy, and then who's still talking about it today?
Well, there's somewhere around 2,000 books. 2,000 books that have been written about the circumstances surrounding Kennedy's death. I was just looking at some reels a few nights ago, and I don't know if Tucker was on Joe Rogan or Joe Rogan was on Tucker Carlson, but they were talking about it, this very topic, and discussing why, after all these years, that both Trump and Biden didn't release the remaining records from the investigations into the assassination. And so you start wondering what could possibly be in these documents that both a Republican and a Democrat, wouldn't release this information. What could be so damning in there that, that it's still being discussed 6 decades later?
What are some of the details of the assassination that we do know about? Because obviously a lot of those documents, most of us, we may never see in our lifetimes. just because they are still locked up, confiscated, locked away from the public. But what are some details of the assassination that we do know about?
Well, Lee Harvey Oswald was this 21-year-old former Marine and proclaimed Marxist. Now, this is at the height of the Cold War with Russia. Russia and the U.S. were the two major powers. So we're talking about an incident. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. That's the year I was born. And he was shot and killed when I was 3 years old. And so I've kind of grown up with all the news and the different groups that have investigated it. But Oswald spent 3 years in Russia, where he tried to renounce his citizenship. And he was just this skinny, scrawny guy, kind of nothing remarkable about him, kind of a heavy shave, on him. And he just looked kind of weaselish. And so he tried to he was in Russia for 3 years, and he tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship. And he'd also had a suicide attempt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's So did Lee Harvey Oswald, did he have a lot of problems just within himself as a person? And do you know if it's just like stuff that leaked from his childhood, if it was childhood trauma, or if it was stuff that he dealt with in the military?
Man, I don't know. I've dug into attachment theory and some of that stuff. Also, the Warren Commission talked about Oswald in their report having this personality pattern disorder with schizoid features. And so it doesn't sound like, it sounds like the guy was, we would say maybe in the simplest terms, he was, he had some mental issues, right? So, yeah.
How did he gain access to the Texas School Book Depository? Because even looking at a picture of the entire area, the acreage on a map, it just seems like a lot of it is just so close together, because nearby, I believe there was the jail as well.
Yes.
Where he was held for some time.
Yeah.
And so how was he able to even gain access to the school book depository in the first place?
Well, that's a really interesting story. So the Texas School Depository was a place where it's where they had school textbook for kindergarten through 12th graders for the Texas school system. And Oswald was hired to help stack and pick books that would be shipped to these schools. And so the guy that hired him testified that Oswald and another guy showed up, were hired for $1.25 an hour. 1960. If you think now that somebody's getting $16 an hour, 10 times as much, but that was the going wage. Of course, you could also buy a house for $12,000. But anyway, so that was November of '63, and the guy that hired him, his supervisor, said that it had been a flip of the coin of whether Oswald went to the 6-story school book depository building or another warehouse that they had just around the block. So it was just it was just kind of random.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And then within that school book depository, within his workplace, over time, he was able just to build his sniper's nest. What he was able just to be able to set up and be able to get his shots off at Kennedy. And how was he able just to do all that, plan all that, seemingly undetected for so long?
Well, so this building, as we said, had been built for the Rock Island Plow Company. It had been struck by lightning. It was rebuilt, and they added some stories onto the additional foundation. So now it was a 6-story building. Do
you know what year that happened?
It was within 20 or 30 years probably before that, and it had multiple different tenants. Well, one of the tenant previous to the Texas School Book Depository folks was a restaurant supplier. And so they had jars of mayonnaise and pickles and all of these, bottles of wine and all of this stuff. And over time, some of those bottles broke, and all that stuff that had spilled into the concrete floors was leaching up into the school books and ruining school books. So what they determined that they were going to do was to lay plywood down. So they would do half a floor at a time, and they would move half the books over, and they'd lay the plywood down. Then they'd move all the books over to the other side. And so on November 22nd, 1963, the books were all stacked up against the windows. So all Oswald had to do was to go up there and just carve out his little sniper's nest where the window was, and he could be undetected when the motorcade went by, and nobody would have thought anything about it.
Do you think it's something that he knew that was going to be happening that day when Kennedy would be passing this motorcade? Do you think it was something he claimed that he knew he was going to get the books up against the windows that day?
You know, that's hard to say. I do know that. So his weapon of choice was this Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 millimeter Italian infantry rifle with a 4-power scope on it, and so he bought this gun for the mail order for the whopping sum of $19.95 and had it mailed in the mail. No background check, no nothing. At that time, they just mailed you a gun. And so it's hard to know what kind of lead time that he needed for that. But you know, the whole thing's kind of crazy. But he ordered it. It showed up, and he was in the sniper's nest on November 22nd at about 12:30 p.m.
So we have a supposed shooter at the top of the Texas School Book Depository peeking through a sniper's nest of school books using a really weak Italian rifle.
Yeah.
And that's just the main theory that we've all known, we've all been taught, and that what's happened. But could you tell us a little bit more about JFK and just how he ended up in this scenario?
Yeah, so Kennedy was the son of a wealthy businessman in Boston. And he was Harvard educated. He was on the swim team. He ran for president in 1960 against Richard Nixon, then Vice President Richard Nixon. And he was the first Catholic to be elected president. You'd had a whole line of Protestants along the, since the founding of the country, so that was unusual. But he was a well-known war hero. He was the commander of a PT boat, which is patrol torpedo. They were these amazingly plywood boats that were super light, that they put 2 massive engines in, and they could go 40, 50 miles an hour, and they could outmaneuver these Japanese destroyers. And so he was down in the Solomon Islands on this really dark night on patrol, and what would happen is these torpedoes would kind of jump off these launchers on the side and get in the water, and then they could evade being shot up. They'd get shot up with machine guns and stuff, and it's just plywood. So on that really dark night, a Japanese destroyer cut their boat basically in half. It rammed up one side of it and cut the whole side off. There was an explosion. There was a fuel fire, and so a couple guys were killed in the collision, and 11 guys ended up in the water. And so the fire extinguished, and it kind of extinguished itself as the boat started to sink. Kennedy got everybody back, and he was the commander. It was his boat, and so he then started towing the injured guys. They had life jackets on, and he put the canvas strap in his teeth, and he was swimming them 5, 6, 7 miles to the nearest island to get them up on the island. And so he ended up. They were going island to island in search of food or water. He found a canoe and started going farther to different islands, and they finally came across 2 natives that somehow were English speaking down in the Solomon Islands. And inside of a coconut, he etched PT 109. Locals know our location. 11 survivors. And so those guys got that onto to the American Navy, and they ended up all being rescued. But it was 6 days of swimming between islands and him towing all these injured guys all around. So he ended up getting the Navy and Marine Medal of Valor, and it was the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. And he also got a Purple Heart because his back was seriously injured in that collision. So he was doing all this while he was pretty jacked up himself.
Oh, yeah. Well, that sounds like somebody you would want leading your country. And then what did he end up doing after the war?
Well, he became a representative, a U.S. representative, and a U.S. senator. He was a good-looking dude, and he was a great orator. He was very smart, and so he became a U.S. senator, and then he ended up running for president in 1960.
Mm-hmm. In the 1960 presidential debate, that was the first ever live televised presidential debate.
That's right. It was 1959. Yeah. He put all these skills to practice. He was good looking. He was a good orator, a good debater, and Nixon just didn't come off as well. This was the first time that a politician was really paying attention to like the color of their shirt and their suit and how that would look against the debate backdrop and kind of some of the things that we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. And so this was the dawn of politicians on TV. This is the first time where people realized, wow, here's this upstart dude that's going to take out the current Republican vice president, mm-hmm. In the election. And so he ended up winning, and people were, they were really excited about his presidency.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people were excited about the presidency because it was really the first time there was a shift in campaigning since Teddy Roosevelt. He would do the town hopping on the train. He would hop on a train and go from town to town to town. He would stop, speak for an hour or two, then get back on the train and move to the next town. And I think that what also has really made him a really good presidential candidate, just because he was able to get out there, be able to broadcast his opinion, his ideas, and his policies to the American people. And then Kennedy, he was married, wasn't he, correct?
Yeah, he had married this really lovely woman, Jacqueline Bouvier, and started a family. And so when he was in the White House, I mean, he was 43 years old. Mm-hmm. Typically usually it would be guys more like my age or older, mm-hmm. that would be in the White House, and all these kind of stuffy older guys that maybe weren't, I mean, here was this kind of athletic young man with this family, and there were pictures of John F. Kennedy Jr. under his dad's desk, when he's on the phone or when he's having meetings. And so his kids were growing up in the White House, and they were crawling all around, and they just had him. It was just like a natural thing to be in there during some security briefing or something with his little kids. I mean, John F. Kennedy Jr. is maybe 2 years old. He's crawling under his dad's desk. So it was pretty cool, and it was real different because of television, people coming into the White House and seeing things that they'd never really been exposed to. It was exciting. It was fresh. It was this young couple. It was kind of like, maybe a little bit of a new vision for the country. So a lot of people were really excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Just taking all that into consideration and fast forwarding to that dreary day on November 22nd, 1963, can you kind of take us through a little bit of play-by-play of what happened that day?
Yeah, so it'd been kind of cloudy and spitting a little rain in the morning, and then the weather cleared, and at about noon, the sun came out and temperatures warmed up to the 60s. It had been very cold, because it's late November, you got some cold fronts coming in, and so tens of thousands of people came out in downtown Dallas. You had all these office workers downtown, and they poured into the streets on their lunch hour to see Kennedy, the motorcade snake through Dallas. And so Kennedy had this big Lincoln, and these were pretty cool. My next door neighbor had one of these big Lincolns, and it had what they call the suicide doors in the back that opened the wrong way. And then it said it was a suicide door because if you jumped out, the door was going to catch you, clip you and get you. But he wanted the hard top of that convertible taken off so that he could relate more to the people. They could take pictures of him. He could greet them. He could wave to them. So that was at I think much to the chagrin of his security team. But they rode through downtown Dallas, and they were coming to what was considered the gateway into downtown, and that was Dealey Plaza. And so, named after George Bannerman Dealey, who was a famous newspaperman in Dallas. And so they came out of the West End, and they had to make this acutely angled turn down Elm Street, and the book depository was right there. So they had to creep to 4 or 5 miles an hour to get around that corner. Mm-hmm. And so they were just going down the hill and maybe, accelerating it at 10 or 15 miles an hour when Oswald shouldered the Italian rifle.
And so then what happened after Oswald fired the first shot?
So he was behind the big stack of books. The first shot missed. So it was a bolt action rifle. So you have to pull the bolt off that back, spit it, and get another round up there, and then regain your sight. And so the second shot hit Kennedy in the back by the neck, and went through and also hit Governor John Connally. The limousine was a 3-row limousine. And so Connally, then the governor of Texas, and his wife were in the second row. You had Secret Service men up front, and then you had Kennedy and Jackie in the back. So the second round hit him and hit Connally, and then the third round was the kill shot. That's the one that hit Kennedy. That's the one that hit Kennedy in the back of the head, and basically, just showered the trunk with remnants of his head. Jackie even crawled out of the car as though, she was just in such shock because, there were pieces of her husband's brain on the trunk that she was just trying, and then she cradled his head. The Secret Service man gunned it, and they took him to Parkland Hospital, which is not very far away. You're basically 4 minutes, about 4 or 5 minutes from Parkland Hospital, and then he, that's where they took him, and he was pronounced dead. So, that's what happened. That was the assassination.
And then what happened to Oswald immediately after the shooting?
Well, he scurried down the stairs, and of course the cops. Some people thought that the shots, and had seen the rifle out of the 6th floor, and had heard the shots, and they were directing police to there because there was a huge DPD, Dallas Police Department, presence there, and so he came out of there, but his supervisor recognized him. And said, no, he works here. Told the cop it's okay. So Oswald was able to get away. He hopped on a bus that was getting stuck in traffic, and so he got out and actually jumped a cab, down to Oak Cliff. Mm-hmm. And while he was doing that, there was most people have heard of Walter Cronkite. He was one of the most well-known, trusted, and beloved media guys news reporters. And back then, that's when they really did report the news. It wasn't this big spin cycle. You could get on one channel or the other, and you were pretty much getting similar stories. But he was at the top of his game, and through tears, he took off his jacket and said that that President Kennedy has been shot, and it's just been confirmed that he's died at Parkland Hospital, and he did that through tears. And so it was a really, that was a really pivotal moment in American history. It's kind of like, where were you for 9/11, or where were you when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? That's what people were asking.
And then, did Oswald ever stand trial for the crimes he committed?
Yeah, he did. And there were some interesting clues left behind that led to that conviction. There was a bullet hole in the passenger side of the windshield that some people thought, wow, Oswald shot him from behind. What's that hole doing there in the windshield? And so there were people, about half of the 100 witnesses that were in Dealey Plaza, they were on that grassy knoll, reported hearing shots from the 6th floor, but also shots behind them. So it's unknown whether it was just kind of the echoing around some buildings, or if that was if there really was another shooter. Some people thought that a guy jumped out of a manhole cover and shot from the front. There was this group of gypsies, homeless vagrants that apparently ran and jumped on a moving train. So people thought that that's what led to some of these, multiple gunman theories. So there was also another DPD cop, a motorcycle cop, that had left his microphone keyed up. And so it recorded all the sounds of the assassination. And then also Abraham Zapruder was this Ukrainian clothing manufacturer that had one of these slick new Bell & Howell square movie cameras. And I don't know if he was having to advance the reel or if it was electric. I don't remember. But 1960, people didn't have home movie cameras, and they were just starting to get color TVs. And so this has been the most studied reel of film in all of history. And it was the first time that people were really exposed, to seeing a homicide on film.
Where was Abraham standing in correlation to Kennedy's motorcade? Was he standing in the front side of it, or was he?
He was. So the depository was here, and Elm Street was here. They make the acutely angled turn. They come down, and Zapruder was on the sidewalk on the other side. So he would have had Oswald to his left, but he was just filming Kennedy as he came down. First shot, second shot, third shot, limo, guns under the overpass, the railroad overpass, and heads to Parkland. So he caught the whole thing.
Do you know what the time difference between each shot was? Because as you were saying, it was an older, terrible Italian rifle. You would have to shoot, do it again, shoot. Was there a long time in between each shot that may or may not rule out whether he was a lone gunman or whether there was another gunman because it would have been shooting too quick? Do you know anything more on that?
Yeah, so the total time necessary for him to get off the 3 shots was somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5 seconds. So they had some of the best marksmen in the world, soldiers, take that same rifle and see if they could shoot, pop around, shoot, pop around, shoot again, and it was pretty fast. But don't look down on that rifle. It was a solid, rugged infantry rifle. It had a very long barrel on it, which will give you increased accuracy, and it had a 4x scope, and it was not a very far shot. I mean, it was a 50-yard shot. If you're a deer hunter, I've shot a deer at 227 yards. Shot a lot of them at 75 to 125. 50 yards that's not a hard target with a 4x scope, and 6.5 millimeter round. That's a good size round. It would have had a lot of killing power at that range. The speed was questionable, not so much the accuracy. The limo was kind of sinking down this little hill, and when he's got that in sight, boom, it's not going to move that much because the velocity of that round is so high.
You were talking about it was cloudy in the morning, then the sun came out as the afternoon came on. Was there a lot of wind that day? Was wind a big factor?
I don't believe at all. And it's kind of a hollow. You're kind of getting down into an area where that wouldn't be, much of a... And then at 50 yards, there's not much of an adjustment. If you're shooting 200 or 400 or 500 yards, yeah, you'd have 1 foot adjustment. He was just spot on at 50 yards, and the velocity of that was enough to take. There was no adjustment.
With all the conspiracies, so there's the Lee Harvey Oswald is a lone gunman shooter. There is the second shooter theory. You talked about gypsies that were moving on a train that were just in town for a little bit, did the act, and then hopped on the train and left. Were there any other conspiracy theories that were surrounding around just JFK and his assassination? Yeah, because, the Gallup poll shortly after the assassination showed that something like 79% of people thought that Oswald hadn't acted alone. The curator of the 6th floor museum that's now in Dallas, I highly recommend if you're in Dallas to check it out, because that's where most of the stuff surrounding the assassination is. You can get up, you can look through the sniper's perch. And so Fagan said prior to the 50th anniversary here in 2013 that, how did one Weasley drifter take down the most powerful man on earth with a $20 mail order rifle? And William Manchester, who's one of my favorite authors, a famous historian, said that it's unsatisfying to accept that a scrawny ex-Marine communist sympathizer could single-handedly take down a man of that stature. It's much more satisfying to believe that there were darker forces at work, a massive conspiracy involving, our own government and international forces, versus just this guy that can get this mail-order rifle and take out the president. Who would have wanted JFK dead at the time, and why?
Well, the mafia was suspected because they had helped Kennedy get elected. Strange bedfellows in politics, right? And so you had these Italian Americans that were involved in organized crime in big cities like New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, all across the country. They were involved in developing some of the casinos in Vegas. And so you had all this organized crime and labor and this kind of shadowy underworld where they were shaking down businesses and taking people out. And so they had helped Kennedy get elected. Some of the Rat Pack guys like Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra and others were involved with these casinos the Kennedys would visit, and it was kind of this strange bedfellows, these weird talking guys from Boston, and all these mob guys. But Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, we know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now, that's been kind of a food warrior and an environmental warrior. His father was the attorney general. And so he started to go after organized crime, and it made the mob mad because they felt betrayed. They'd helped Kennedy get elected, and now he was going after him. And so that was one of the first groups, that were suspected. The other one was people in his own party. The Southern Democrats, Kennedy was a Democrat. The Southern Democrats weren't happy about some of his proposed civil rights legislation, equal pay for equal work, some of the predecessor thoughts to, as Martin Luther King was gaining notoriety, and race relations were kind of strained, and you still had in the South where blacks couldn't go to a restaurant or had to use colored fountains instead of white fountains, and so that wasn't very popular in many portions of the South, and so and then Johnson himself, Lyndon B. Johnson was Kennedy's vice president, and he was pulled in to shore up that support in the South. He had been the governor of Texas. With Lady Bird, plant a tree or a bush or a shrub, and he'd been a very popular governor. And so, but the Texas governor and the boys from Harvard Yard had very little in common. I mean, they were like oil and water. And it was rumored that Johnson had found out that Kennedy was going to seek a different running mate for 1964. And so the rumor mill, the conspiracy theories are that Lyndon Johnson had something to do with it.
You said that earlier. You said that Lee Harvey Oswald, he was in Russia for 3 years, and he actually tried denouncing his U.S. citizenship. Do you think at the time the Cuban Missile Crisis was just a couple of years before? Do you think that the Russians or the KGB might have had anything to do with it as well?
Absolutely. So the Russians at that time were under Nikita Khrushchev. The Cubans were under Fidel Castro. The communists had taken over Cuba. And the Cold War, I mean, it was in full swing. We didn't know what to do with the Russians, and the division in Berlin of East Berlin and West Berlin, and them having to wall people in to keep them in there. And so the Cold War and the competition between the countries was really cranking up. And so the United States led a covert invasion. They took some Cuban exiles and had the famed Bay of Pigs invasion, where they were slaughtered, and the word got back that it was a U.S. Backed mission. Then you had we were flying U-2 spy planes. Spy planes that fly 70,000, 80,000 feet, something like that. One of them was shot down over Cuba, and then in one of the subsequent U-2 flights, they determined that the Russians were shipping intercontinental ballistic missiles to Cuba. And so that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's the closest that we've ever been to nuclear war. It was a big standoff. The United States put a military ring around Cuba and a blockade, and weren't going to let the Russians bring in, missiles. And so it was finally settled. We took some missiles out of Turkey, some troops out of Turkey. They took some stuff out of Cuba, and it was détente. But Cuba, you're just talking just spitting distance from Miami. I mean, I think it's like 80 or 90 miles. It's very close. Diana and I had swam across it. It's not that far. So, yeah. So there were also, the U.S. State Department, the CIA. Oswald was accused of being, a fake defector when he'd gone to Russia and then came back. The State Department paid to repatriate him. Why? Which is, really odd. You've got this communist sympathizer that's crazy. Why would they pay to have him come back? And so was it just the optics of that, the defection and then coming back? And then you had kind of the whole military-industrial complex thought that Kennedy was kind of going a little soft on the communists. They wanted war, just like right now, just like Ukraine and Gaza. They wanted to see, they didn't want to see a Cold War. They wanted to see a hot mess war. So there were thoughts that maybe they were conspiring to get rid of him and to bring in a more hawkish government. And look what happened to Vietnam. We were in the early stages of Vietnam, and LBJ just blew that thing up. I mean, it became a big, big conflict.
Who investigated all of the evidence? Because a lot of the things that we hear now, or the main thing that we hear about the JFK investigation, is the Warren Commission.
Right.
And so at the time, who took the lead on investigating all the evidence?
So Chief Justice Earl Warren was a Supreme Court justice, and he was given resources and manpower and the ability to pull together a whole bunch of people to do the investigation. And so they went in. It was the first one after the assassination, and it published its report a year later, which basically was that Oswald acted alone. And that was their conclusion after running down a lot of tips, talking to all the witnesses, and really scouring all the information that they could gather. This commission was put together almost immediately after the assassination, because all these wild theories were being thrown out there.
Well, even at the end of the day, nobody even really got a chance to talk to Lee Harvey Oswald about the situation, just because what happened a couple of days after.
Yeah, he himself was assassinated, and so you had Oswald that was in the Dallas City jail, and there was this nightclub owner, this guy named Jack Ruby. He was a former boxer, and he would take he had two clubs, a couple clubs. One of them was the Carousel Club, and it was a girly club. It was a burlesque club. And so he would take his girly pictures, whoever the girly of the week was, or 2 or 3 or 4, and he was always showing these pictures around. He had a lot of Dallas cops that were doormen for him, that worked extra job, making money, and they were his security guys. So the guys at the jail let him in when Oswald had fled to Oak Cliff. He shot a cop point blank. And then fled to this theater. It was one of the first air-conditioned theaters in the United States, and the cops took him down. He tried to shoot another cop, but the webbing between his thumb and forefinger got in the hammer as he pulled the gun out. And so they took him down. He came out with bruises and a black eye, and he said, "I'm a patsy." I'm it's not really me. There's more to this. And so 2 days later, he was being transferred out of the Dallas jail, and Jack Ruby's in there, the nightclub owner, and he goes right up to him and shoots him point blank in the gut. And so they asked Ruby, why did you do that? Well, I wanted to save Jackie Kennedy, the First Lady, the discomfiture of Oswald standing a trial and her having to come back and testify. And so that was his, the deal. So there was another group, the House Select Committee, came, and that was in 1977, because all these conspiracy theories were were just growing wild. We talked about 2,000 books being written about it as of now, but all of these different theories were coming across because the Kennedys had a lot of enemies, and they were doing a lot of things that people both domestically and internationally weren't crazy about. So they completed their investigation in '78. That's the year I graduated from high school, and they determined that 4 shots were fired. There was this crazy bullet theory. The ballistics with the 3 shots would have had the round that came out of Kennedy, the second shot, and went into Connolly, have to make this really twisted route. And so on the stretcher that Kennedy was carried into the hospital on, there was another bullet that was found, and it was pristine. And that was supposedly the bullet that had gone through all this bone through 2 men and wasn't compressed or So anyway, they said that organized crime, Cuba, Russia, CIA, FBI, Secret Service not involved in the plot. Now, the FBI and the CIA were allowed to self-investigate. So back then there was a lot more trust in those organizations than there is now. So that was one of the things that was, I guess, not as thorough an investigation as maybe, you would do now. So bottom line, 2,000 books. They estimated that around 214 people have been accused at one time or another of being involved with this, 82 possible assassins, and 42 different groups of people. So, and there were 103 convenient deaths of witnesses that were tied to the Kennedy assassination. So that makes the hair go up on my arms. That's just chilling, right? That you start to see these people. They said that it's statistically impossible that many people connected to the case would just have all these, that would die in all these random ways. So, yeah. So
what do you think happened?
Well, I think Oswald was the lone gunman. I think that he really did. I think that he I don't know if he ordered this rifle to for this, but he was at the right time at the right place with books stacked up against the wall and an opportunity. And so, but both Trump and Biden have refused to release the remaining records, and I think that's what's so damning. That the FBI or the CIA or the Secret Service, may have been involved.
And why do you think that is?
I think that because you look and you say, what could be in those records? So Trump made a comment to Tucker about it because Tucker had asked him about it, and he said, if you had seen what I saw in those records, you wouldn't release it either. It's classified. And so you think if it was a foreign government, if it was a member of the other party, the other political party, whether Democrat or Republican, if it was Cuba or Russia, what would be the harm of releasing that information? But if it's a government agency like the FBI or the CIA, then it undermines everyone's confidence in government to think that they had some kind of active role in possibly killing the president. And I have a friend of mine that did drug interdiction in Central and South America for years and was involved with a lot of clandestine CIA operations and military operations. And he said if the CIA did it, it would be 30, arm's length, people down the chain of whoever finally did it. But I think that there has to be, some pretty damning information in those reports that neither Biden or Trump would release it. And here we are 61 years later still talking about it.
And that's all that we can really do is talk about it. Do you think we'll ever be able to get to a day where us as a country, us as a society can say, yes, this is exactly what happened to John F. Kennedy?
I hope so, but I think, maybe in your lifetime, I don't know about mine. I think the fact that both Biden and Trump didn't release it. One of the other theories is that somebody like Mossad may have taken out, which is Israel's our biggest ally in the Middle East, and that somebody like that may have been responsible for it, where. Israel and the United States help each other out here and there. And so there's something in that report that either points to one of maybe our government agencies or maybe an ally that they have just said, we can't release this. If you look at, for example, the amount of anti-Semitism right now, with Israel trying to protect itself and everybody claiming that they're, sort of an occupier, which of course they've been in Israel for 4,000 years. So, but something like that maybe it's an ally, maybe it's England or Germany or France or who knows. But there's something in there that they think would cause such an issue and such a problem that could be even bigger than the assassination itself.
In the sixth floor of the depository, you were telling me a little bit before we started recording. What does the plaque say on the sixth floor of the depository?
Well, the plaque is actually down at the entrance, the main entrance to the building, and it's a brass plaque because now the 411 Elm is on it's up on the National Historic Register. It used to be, at the time of the assassination, it had a big Hertz sign on it, rent-a-car sign. They pulled that off. They even thought about demoing the building because it was such a stain on Dallas's reputation, that the president had come here and been killed, and that who are these hateful racists in Dallas that want to kill this wonderful president. And so on the plaque it says, on November 22nd, 1963, the building gained notoriety when Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly killed President John F. Kennedy from a sixth floor window as the presidential motorcade passed by. And so over the years, the word allegedly has been like underlined and gouged out many times. And it's kind of an eerie testimony to the controversy surrounding the granddaddy of them all, of conspiracy theories, that kind of still rocks Dallas, the United States, and the world, 63 years later.
Do you have any final words just upon the conspiracy itself?
No, but I hope that that this podcast will get people maybe more your age that aren't familiar with what happened there, that'll get them more interested in it, because it is the whodunit of all whodunits. And so it's been fascinating to look into it, and there's still crumbs that are being dropped out from people. There were a couple hundred books that were just published, for the 50th anniversary, and so I think that there's probably not any other thing like it where you could find more books, more theories, more possible people that were involved, more motives. And so it's endlessly fascinating.
And you also have an article that you've written, like we said, on the 50th anniversary, 411. What was the name of it?
It was a 411 Elm, Cradle of Evil. And so if you type that in and put Christensen, Christensen, in your search window, that D Magazine article will come up.
And I went ahead and I put that on the X account, TBCD_podcast. And the description of this video, I'll go ahead and link that article as well. If you have nothing else and no other final words, I really would just like to thank you again, Riis, for meeting with me today. It was really great. Make sure you guys tune in. You could possibly see Riis again here in a future episode on another topic. And so we'll keep that a little hidden at the moment, and just make sure you guys have to tune in for future episodes. So again, thank you, Riis, so much for taking time out of your day to meet with me, and make sure that you guys stick tuning in to the podcast.